In this video, we're going to be giving a quick introduction to Excel, as well as week 2 of the course. The purpose of this video is not to go in depth on Excel, but rather to just give a brief introduction to what Excel is, talk a little bit about the history of spreadsheets, and how you can get help through documentation. We'll be going in depth in Excel through tutorials in other videos. But first, a few announcements. The first big announcement is that Assignment 1 has been posted, and it's going to be found on the OWL Assignments tab. It's going to cover Excel, that'll be the main thing, as well as product costs and a situational setup for a company that will follow us through the assignments. And I'm going to go quickly over to the OWL site and show you how you would submit this assignment, just in case you haven't used OWL before for an online course. So here you see the OWL course site, which you should be a little bit familiar with by this point in the course. What we're going to be interested in is this Assignments tab. So when you click on the Assignments tab, you'll see all the assignments that are available in the course. Right now it's just going to be Assignment 1, but more will pop up as assignments are posted throughout the course. So in this case, we were going to want to click on Assignment 1. So when we first click on an assignment, it's going to ask you to answer an honor pledge. And this is just saying that you understand that assignments in this course are meant to be done individually, without the help of any outside source or outside tutor. The only people you should be going for help with assignments in this course are the TAs or myself. So don't share your assignment, don't send it to anyone, and don't receive an assignment from anyone else. So once you agree to those terms, hit agree. So after you accept the honor pledge, you'll be able to review the details of the assignment. I'm not going to go too in depth into these, but essentially it's going to show you the due dates, the instructions, and the rules for the assignment. These are things like how to name your files, the late policy, which you should already be familiar with since you watched the syllabus video, that resubmissions are allowed. This means that you can resubmit your assignment up to the due date, and the last resubmission will be marked. Do note, though, that if you resubmit after the due date, that late penalty does apply. So only resubmit after the due date if you're sure you want to incur that late penalty. Reminder, the late penalty in this course is that you get 4 late coupons that let you submit 1 day late each coupon with no penalty, but after that, it's 0 once you're out of coupons. There's a note for VLab users if you're going to be using my VLab, so read that. And it also says that you are required to back up your assignments. So as you're working on your assignment, make sure that you're making backups, just so you don't lose it if your hard drive crashes or you have an issue like that. And of course, assignments are to be completed individually. The big thing you should worry about are what's at the end of the assignment here. These are going to be 2 attachments that will explain what you're doing and how to do it, as well as an example solution. So the first one, assignment1.pdf, will be a set of instructions that you go through, and you're eventually going to create a Word document and an Excel workbook. The other file, called example solution, is going to give you an example of what your solution should look like. So it's not going to give away the solution in terms of Excel formulas, but it'll give you an idea of what it should look like when you're done. Except you're not going to be using the same example with 4 city ducks. You're going to be creating your own company, so your costs and numbers should be a bit different. So now once you've completed your assignment and you want to submit, you can submit down here. So when you want to attach one of those, you click Choose File down here. You navigate to where you've stored your files. And you select your file. In this case, I'm selecting the Excel file, and hit Open. Then you'd attach your next file. So for example, if it was PDF, and so on. And you keep doing that process until you have all the files selected. So if this was an actual assignment, you'd also have a Word document that you have to attach. Once you're very sure you want to submit, you can hit Proceed. If you're not sure you want to submit yet, you can hit Save Draft, and it'll keep those files uploaded and allow you to edit it. Just be very sure that you actually hit Proceed and submit with your assignment before the due date. If it's just a draft, I'm not sure if it will actually submit for you. So when you want to submit, hit Proceed. And it's just telling you, are you sure? And you hit Submit. And now your assignment is submitted. And since this is graded by a real person, one of the teaching assistants in the course, it is going to take a little bit for it to get back. We try to get things back within a week, but depending on things that are happening that week, it could take sooner or later. So you can hit back. And if you've done what you should do and submit this assignment as soon as you can, early, once you've got it completed, you will have some time before the due date to think about it. And you might think, oh, maybe I got something wrong. I want to update that. And that's fine up to the due date. You just go back to the assignment. And you can add another file, for example. Let's add another file. And once you do that, you hit proceed again. And you can hit submit. And that would be a resubmission. And whatever you submitted last will be marked. And that does mean if you submit past the due date, resubmit past the due date, you would get a late mark. So make sure you know when you're submitting. And once you submit, OWL should send you an email. So if you want to be sure your thing was submitted correctly, look at your Western email and you should see a little email from OWL saying that your assignment was submitted. So let's go back to the slides to look at those other announcements. So there is one other thing to note while we're working on assignment 1, and that is you need to use Excel 2016 or newer. So things like Office 365 would be fine. That's newer than Excel 2016. And if you've installed Microsoft Office since the start of the course, you should be good to go. One way to check would be to see what types of files you're creating when you save with Excel. If they end in .xlsx with an X on the end, that means you should be good to go. If they end with an S, just XLSS with no X, that means you're probably using an older version and you need to download the new one. That shouldn't be a problem as it's available for Windows and Mac, and it's free to Western students. If you have any questions about how to install Microsoft Excel, please refer to the software setup video posted in the Week 1 tab. The other thing to note is that we now have TA consulting hours going this week, going forward in the course. So if you'd like to talk to a TA for help with the assignment or anything else in the course, you can do that. So this week, we will have 3 main ways of learning about Excel. These will also be our readings and lectures or tutorials for the week. The first one is your textbook. It has a chapter called Knowledge Extension 4, which talks a little bit about Excel. Fortunately, it's a little bit lightweight on content, which means we're going to be supplementing it with a few other resources. The next one is going to be a text-based tutorial, and it's going to be presented as some PDF slides. You can find these on the Week 2 tab on OWL. And remember, you're going to be able to find that under Course Content. So you click on Course Content, and then you click Week 2. And it should show you everything that you need to access. It'll just be like the Week 1 tab, except everything will be about Week 2. So this tutorial is going to go into depth on a bunch of different functions and how we do formulas and things like that. And I'm presenting it as a PDF rather than me talking in front of it, because it's a lot of sort of syntax and things like that I don't think really benefits from me reading them to you. Instead, I think the ideal way to learn about Excel and practical things would be through doing them. So what we're going to do this week is there's a tutorial video, and what I'd like you to do is sort of work along with this tutorial. So on the screen, I'll be covering different things about Excel, and we'll be working on some examples together. I have the workbooks posted to OWL that you can download and follow along with, and every so often I'll stop the video and ask a question. When I do this, you should try to answer that question to yourself. It's not a participation question, it's more of just for your own understanding. And then once you think you have an answer, unpause the video and follow along with the solution. So this is a bit of a longer tutorial. It's about 2 hours. So to make it easier for you when you're studying or working on your assignment and you want to find something particular in the video, I have made a way for you to jump to certain points in the video based on the topic you're looking for. So let's take a look at that. So here's the Week 2 tab on OWL. This might look a little different than your view because it's in the instructor view right now. But you should be able to get here since you access this video through video lectures. But on the right-hand side here, we have video tutorial. So this link right here, it brings us to our video tutorial on Microsoft Excel. And it just brings you to the start of the video. However, if you wanted to jump to a certain point in that video, based on a topic, underneath this link, I have a bunch of different places you can click to jump. And it jumps to the same video, but at a certain timestamp in that video. So for example, if you're interested in logic functions, instead of going for the first link and trying to search for everything, you can click here, Part 4, Logic Functions. And instead, that will jump you right in the video to where you want it to go. This should make it a little bit easier to find things. So moving on, let's give a quick introduction to what Excel is. Now, once again, we're going to be focusing on the what in this video, whereas the how to use it will be covered in the video tutorial. So you might be asking, what is a spreadsheet? Well, we have a few textbooky type definitions here. They're computer program to organize and analyze data in a tabular form, and it presents a grid of cells, each of which can contain text, numerical data, or the results of computation. But let's take a look at what that actually means. Here we have a screenshot of Microsoft Excel 2016. Excel is the most popular and commonly used spreadsheet software. Recall that on that last slide, we stated that spreadsheets are tabular and present grids of cells, and you can probably already sort of see the tabular form here. This means that we have a table of horizontal columns and vertical rows. When we talk about columns, we refer to them by the letter shown on the top here. For example, we might say column A, column B, column C, and so on. When we get past column Z, it will add a second letter, so it would be things like column AA, column AB, column AC, and so on, all the way up to column XFD, where it ends. Rows are referred to by number, so we might have rows like 1, row 2, row 3, row 4, and they go all the way up to 1,048,576. That may seem really big, but if for some reason you need more rows or columns where you're starting to hit the limits of Excel, that means you're probably not using Excel for its intended purpose, and you should probably consider splitting that into multiple sheets, or moving to a database management system like Access, which we will be covering later in the course. Now, the important part is what is contained in these rows and columns, which are cells. Cells are a single piece of data, or more properly called datum. Cells are referred to by their cell address. This is a combination of the column letter followed by the row number. For example, the cell we have highlighted right now in the green is called E4. That's because it's in column E and is in row 4. This naming scheme gives each cell its own unique address. That will become important later on when we start referencing cells and formulas. So cells can contain single number, piece of text. In computer science, we usually call that a string, or a formula. So formulas are equations that set the value of a cell based on the result of some calculation, rather than a hard-coded value we type in. We'll get far more into this in the video tutorial, so don't worry about it if you don't quite understand it yet. Cells also have formatting associated with them. This has two parts to it. First is the type of formatting you'd be used to using programs like Microsoft Word. This would be things like setting fonts, font sizes, colors, backgrounds, borders, and so on. This formatting would be purely for appearance reasons, and it doesn't have any impact on the data or calculations. Kind of just makes it more human readable and human usable. The second type of formatting determines how Excel interprets the data in the cells. This is commonly referred to as number formats or number categories. And what this does is, based on how you set the number category, or number format rather, Excel will interpret the data as text, numbers, currency, dates, percentages, and so on. Next, we should discuss what we call this whole thing. An Excel file is referred to as a workbook, or an Excel workbook. Whereas individual sheets, or tables of rows and columns, is referred to as a worksheet, or just a sheet. A workbook can contain multiple sheets, up to 255 sheets per workbook. Sheets allow you to better organize your data and calculations and make things easier to work with, rather than just having one massive table of data. So now that we have a little bit of an idea of what spreadsheets are, we'll learn far more in that video tutorial, you might be asking, why are they important? Well, the idea of spreadsheets have been around and used in accounting for hundreds of years. It's only since the 70s, however, that they have been electronic. For this, they'd be largely done on paper in ledger books or large handwritten tables. And all of those calculations would be done manually. In fact, that word computer that we're so familiar with originally referred not to an electronic machine or device, but it was a job title for people that would be responsible for simply doing manual calculations on large tables of data. Shown here is a picture of a computer room from the 1940s. In particular, this is a computer room for the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, or NACA. But you might notice something is a little bit missing from this computer room, at least as a computer room we'd understand it today. And that is, there's no computers here. At least not as we now understand them. Instead, the computers here were human computers, who would manually transcribe raw data from cellulose film and then use slide rules to perform calculations. So it's sort of interesting to think about how long this must have taken and how much manpower it must have taken. Nowadays, this has been replaced by things like Microsoft Excel and databases that can allow someone to do the same calculations quite rapidly. Spreadsheets also played a very important role in computing history. They are one of the first killer apps that made businesses start to invest in computing hardware and software and bring about acceptance of the personal computer, both for businesses and home users. They made it a reason for the consumer to want to have this. I have some optional readings here that you can read if you're more interested in the history of computing, but one great documentary I'd suggest you watch is Triumph of the Nerds. You won't be graded on that, except for this little part that I'm going to show you now.
The enthusiast market had its limits. To reach the rest of us, the Apple II needed what nerds call a killer application, software that's so useful that people will buy computers just to run it. For the Apple II, this application was called VisiCalc. It came straight from the blackboards of the Harvard Business School. Invented by a graduate student, Dan Bricklin, with his programmer friend Bob Frankston, VisiCalc was the first electronic spreadsheet. A spreadsheet is a tool for financial planning, bringing together for the first time the seduction of money with the power of microcomputing. Dan Bricklin's professor at Harvard showed how companies used a grid of numbers on a blackboard to work out profits and expenses.
60 down here, and your profit would be this minus this, which gives you 40. And then, well, let's see, what's the sales growth? We'll say there's a 10%.
The trick to a spreadsheet is that all the values in the table are related to the others. So changes in one year would ripple through the table, affecting prices and profits in subsequent years. Students were asked to calculate how future profits would be affected by various business scenarios. It was called running the numbers, and they did it laboriously, by hand.
Well, let's say your initial costs have 100 fixed cost at the beginning, so now you have a minus 20 is how much you make the first year. And then the second year you have 100, but your variable, let's say, is 25. So now you're losing, what is it? There's a pain in the neck. I wasn't very good at this stuff. 80, what? No.
We failed. We just lost
minus 15, right? And then eventually you're making money. What year do we make money? And, and how much does the cost of money? That's what running the numbers was.
Because each value was linked to the others, one mistake could mean disaster.
It blows all your numbers afterwards because you make all your calculations based on other numbers before them. If I had miscalculated...
Dan, who had worked as a programmer, started daydreaming about how he could use a computer to replace the tedious hand calculations.
I imagined that there was this magic blackboard that did like word processing does word wrapping. If you make a change to a word, it automatically pulls everything back. Well, why not recalculate the same way? So that if I changed my number, I should have used 10% instead of 12%. I could just put it in, and it would recalculate everything, go through it. And that would be this idea of electronic spreadsheet.
Following a model that's common today, Dan Bricklin designed the program, but got his friend Bob Frankston to write the actual computer code. After months of programming late at night, when computer time was cheaper, the Harvard Business School blackboard came to life.
Now we've set this up, okay? Then we type a new value in, okay? Here I'm going to take that 100, and I'm going to change it, right? And here, it recalculated. Whoa! That saved me so much time.
People who saw it and went and got it, but like an accountant, I remember showing it to one around here, and he started shaking and said, "That's what I do all week. I could do it in an hour. What I could do, and they would take their credit cards and shove them in your face." I meet these people now, they come up to me and say, "I got to tell you, it's
you changed my life.
Changed my life. You made accounting fun." And
you have to remember what it was like in those days. We did not use the word spreadsheet because nobody knew what a spreadsheet was. I came up with the name Visible Calculator, or VisiCalc, because we wanted to emphasize that aspect.
VisiCalc hit the market in October 1979, selling for $100. Marv Goldschmidt sold the first copies from his computer store in Bedford, Massachusetts. After a slow start, VisiCalc took off.
What it did in our society, it gave people who were obsessed with numbers, whether they're in business or at home, how much am I worth today? What's my stock portfolio worth? How am I doing against budget on this project? It gave them the ability to play with scenarios and change it and say, well, what if I do this? So put people, in a sense, in control of the thing that lots of people in our society feel is driving them, and that's numbers.
The spreadsheet was every businessman's crystal ball. It answered all those what-if questions. What if I fire the engineering department? What if I invest $10 million in pantyhose futures? Look, I'll be rich in under a year and have slimmer thighs at the same time. The computer says so. The effect of the spreadsheet was enormous. Armed with an Apple II running VisiCalc, a 24-year-old MBA with 2 pieces of dubious data could convince his corporate managers to allow him to loot the corporate pension fund and do a leverage buyout. It was the perfect tool for the 80s, the me decade, when money was everything and greed was good. But not all the PC pioneers made great fortunes. Dan Bricklin decided not to patent his spreadsheet idea. Though more than 100 million spreadsheets have been sold since 1979, Bricklin and Frankston haven't earned VisiCalc royalties in years.
You know, looking back at how successful a lot of other people have been, it's kind of sad that we weren't as successful.
It would be very nice to be gazillionaires.
So that was a small segment from the Triumph of the Nerds documentary. And the important takeaway here is that VisiCalc, the first spreadsheet software, was that killer app that really got personal computers going. It's what made them sort of useful to the home consumer as well as the business consumer, and made them marketable and acceptable by the general public. One last thing I should talk about is how you can find and use the Excel documentation. In the real world, users of Excel don't memorize every function and formula. Rather, they rely on the documentation provided by Microsoft to look up the functions they need and understand how to use them. Being able to use this documentation correctly is a very important skill, as it allows you to be self-sufficient and expand your Excel knowledge as you need it. In fact, I would strongly suggest that you don't start learning Excel by trying to memorize functions and formulas. You shouldn't be going through those PDF slides and trying to memorize absolutely every function in there. But rather, you should study it through practice and practical examples. That'd be looking up functions and details as you go. This is why we mostly have a tutorial to follow this week, rather than me just going through the slides and reading the syntax of functions to you, because I don't think that's a great way to learn it. I think you should learn by doing when it comes to the practical parts of this course. So where can you go to find this documentation, and how do you use it? Well, there are 3 main sources: the documentation built into Excel, the official Office support site, and I have some supplementary resources posted on OWL that'll sort of guide you to some other web-based resources. So what you can see on the screen right now is just a simple Excel workbook. But one thing to note is while we're working in Excel and typing in a formula, let's say we want some numbers here. Let's type 1, 2, 3, 4, and we want to take the sum of those numbers. As we start typing in a formula, either into the address bar up here or into a cell directly down here, we can see that it starts typing suggestions for us. So what these suggestions are a list of functions built into Excel that are available for us to use. So in this case, we just want to take the sum of the numbers. So we could scroll down and see that one of the functions available is sum. And when we click on that, it tells us a short description. It says adds all the numbers in a range of cells. But as we start typing more, it's going to show us the syntax right here. So at first, the syntax can be a little confusing. First, it starts with sum, and it says number 1, and then there's some numbers in square brackets and some ... So what these are in here are parameters that this function is going to take. Those are values that you have to provide it. If they're written without any brackets around them, that means it's a mandatory parameter and you have to provide it. So this could be a value that you type in, like 55, or it could be a cell reference, like B1, or it could be a range, like that, B1 to B4. And don't worry if you don't understand these ranges and things yet, but we're going to be getting more into those in the tutorial. The important part here is understanding the syntax. So the next thing we can see is that there's number 2 in square brackets. So what the square brackets mean is that this is an optional parameter. So it means we could just close this function now, like so, and hit enter, and it would give us the total. 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 is 10. Or we could start adding more parameters. So in this case, we could add another 10. So this would be saying take the sum of this range and the number 10. and then we get 20. The other thing to note is while we're going along, you can see that there's this ... at the end. That means that this list keeps going and going. So we could keep on adding more parameters that we want to add to the sum. So if we want to know more about this function, we could click on sum here and hit yes, yes. And what will come up on the side is a description of the sum function. And then sometimes we even get videos, little mini video tutorials telling us how to use it. I'm going to try hitting play here.
Use the sum function to add values. You can add individual.
And that would be like a little tutorial just on how to use this function. So this built-in documentation is quite powerful. It also gives examples. And if we could scroll down, we get syntax. Again, it's using the same syntax I described to tell you how to use the function. It describes each of the parameters. It says like the first number you want to add would be number 1, and it says what that can be. And it even has best practices. So this is an extremely great resource. There's another way to access this when you're in Excel, and that would be clicking on this help little tab up here. This will bring up the help ribbon. You can click on the help button right here on the help ribbon, and that will bring up that little help menu again. And we can use this search bar to search for any function that we want to use. So instead of sum, let's take a look at count. So we type it in, it has suggestions, but we can just type it in and hit enter. And it will say using the count function. So that's a quick description, but we can also go down here for more details. So we click on count function, and if you get this warning, just hit yes. And it gives you a description of the count function. It gives you a little video tutorial that you can follow along, and the syntax. So in this case, it's saying count takes at least one value, but it can take any number of more optional values. We know that because the bracket means it's optional, and the ... at the end means it can take an unlimited number. It tells us that value is required, the first item, the cell reference, or the range that you want to count the numbers in. Then I have some remarks, examples, all kinds of stuff. So this is super powerful when you're going to be working on that assignment. But if we remember, there was a few other ways to get into the documentation. Let's take a look. So another way to get to that same documentation, and in this case without necessarily having to have Excel installed or, well, on your phone even, would be to use the site supportoffice.com. So here I have a browser, and I have support.office.com already typed in, and I hit enter. It's going to bring up this site. So this is support for all Office products. You could hit Excel to get more Excel-specific stuff, but we can just start by typing the function name right into this little search box. So in this case, let's say we want to learn about the function called min_a. So one of the first results here is going to be min_a function, and you know we're on the right track because it says it applies to Microsoft Excel. And when we click on that, we're going to get the same sort of documentation. It's going to have a description of the function, returns smallest value in the list of arguments. It has the syntax. It says min_a takes a value and then any number of optional values. And it has remarks about what this does, how it works, and even has examples of how to use it. So it's the same documentation you'd find in Excel, but this allows you to access it on your phone, for example, or if you don't have Excel installed. So the last way to get some documentation on Excel is going to be the resources I have posted on the OWL Week 2 tab. Let's take a look. So right here, this is on the Week 2 tab on OWL, and at the bottom of the page, there's this supplementary section. So I have some optional readings on history, but also down here I have Excel documentation links. So these would be links to individual functions that we'll probably be using in the course, as well as little tutorials on how to use different things. These are additional to what I'm covering, so you shouldn't have to look at these. You'll get the same content in the video tutorial and those tutorial PDF slides. However, these might be a faster way to get right into what you're looking for, rather than trying to go through the video and finding what you want. So now we've come to our participation activity for week 2. And this is going to be the only one this week, and it's going to be worth the full 150 points. For this activity, and you should only start it after you've already read the slides and followed along with the video tutorial, is that you're going to go out to the Excel documentation and pick an Excel function. In a second, I'll tell you which ones you can pick from. And you are going to make a forum post explaining the function to the class. So this is going to consist of 3 parts. First, a description of the function in your own words, and this does have to be in your own words. You can't just copy and paste it from the documentation. The syntax of the function, That's sort of the syntax we've been seeing in the documentation. You can copy that from the documentation, that's fine. And 3, an example. So this is going to be your own example, not one from the documentation, and you should make it as real world as possible. And this is going to explain how you use the function. It doesn't have to be too complicated, but it should give the idea across. And to make that example more clear, you can attach a screenshot or the whole workbook that you made an example in. The idea of this activity is 2 parts. The first one is to get you out there in the Excel documentation, learn how to use the documentation, because I think that's a super valuable skill. The second reason we're doing this activity is to sort of flip things around and put you in the role of a teacher. You're going to teach the class about the function you pick, and I think that helps a lot for learning. When you're having to explain a concept, you have to have a good handle on it. You have to sort of understand it more completely than if you're just sort of learning it to use on a test or an exam. So by flipping this around, I think it'll help you get a good understanding of that Excel function that you look into. Also, it'll sort of make our own documentation on the forums where we'll have a list of Excel functions that the class talked about, which will be kind of fun. So the functions you can pick from, basically any function that I haven't covered in depth in the video tutorial. So I have a list here. This list here are ones that you cannot pick. So anything that's not on this list. If you want to look at the full list of Excel functions, I have a link here in the slide. It should also be in the video description because I know you can't click on the video. And it's also listed in OWL under supplementary resources. And this link will just have a nice list of all the Excel functions by type, and it'll let you find one that you can pick from. One thing you might be wondering about is, for example, you can see count here on this list. That means you can't use count for this activity, but you are allowed to use its alternate versions. So you could post about count A, count if, or count ifs. Those would all be allowed. But if you use one like this, that's like an alternate version of one of the functions on the list, like count A, you should put a little quick thing in your description just saying how it's different than the regular version. So I'm going to give you a quick example of what this might look like for the sum function. So sum's not a perfect example because it's on the list of ones you can't use, but it's a good one because we're going to be fairly familiar with it after we've read the tutorials. So first we'd post a description. This should be all in one form post. And it says, in this case, the sum function takes a list of cell references or ranges and outputs a number equal to the summation of cells, and so on. And the important part here is that this is in my own words. I didn't copy and paste this from the documentation. And it should be about a paragraph, about at least 2 sentences. At most, 1 paragraph. Then the next part of the form post, still in the same form post, would be your syntax. So this can be copied from the documentation. In this case, it's sum, and then it takes 1 number, and then any number of optional numbers. And the last part of your form post should be an example. This should be your own example, shouldn't be one taken from anywhere. In this case, you have a very simple problem. In this case, I show a sheet with some balances, and I ask, how do you add up the balances? And then I show the solution with the sum function at the end. Note that I have the screenshot here. If you think a screenshot would be helpful to explain your example, please do include it in your form post. If for some reason you can't take screenshots, you can always take a picture of your screen with a camera or your phone and then add that. Or you can attach your workbook. Or even just make up your own little table using the OWL form tools and sort of pretend that that's Excel. So long as you're getting the idea of the example across to your fellow students, that's great with me. So that's all I have for you in this video. Your next step should be starting to read that Knowledge Extension 4, then look over those PDF slide tutorial, and follow along with that video tutorial. After you've done those things, then you can work on that participation activity. And after you've got all that done, you can start working either on the MyLab homework, which will give you even more Excel practice, or you can start working on assignment 1, which should be now posted. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.